Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Sunday night, September 6, 2015 edition of Nightcast. We will have news in the program later tonight, friends, on the rally, the big rally today in Kentucky for Kim Davis, some even holding placards saying Kim Davis for president. First, Clive Marie has our opening report from Munich about how thousands more migrants and refugees have continued to make their way to Austria and Germany, and how that's being received.
The end of the line, and they hope the beginning of a new life. Here in Frankfurt, the reception was, as it had been elsewhere in Germany, one of cheers, applause, banners and balloons. These are the huddled masses of the 21st century. Most from Syria, they have been travelling for many days. In East Germany at Saalfeld, refugees were given bags containing food and drink before being put onto buses, taking them to reception centres.
Almost all of these people are from Syria, from the terrible war there, the situation where IS kill everyone who isn't of their opinion, and we'll make these people feel welcome by us.
In Hungary, as train after train departs, more and more migrants arrive. Germany has no idea how many to expect. They talk of 800,000. The scale of this human tide has washed away the normal rules. The German authorities say Syrian migrants are almost guaranteed asylum, but policy is confused, and there remains little sign of a coordinated European Union response. Ben Ando, BBC News.
Okay, and thank you, Ben. And you caught me in the middle of preparing some things that I'm having to do last minute in order to get some up-to-the-moment stories I want to have here for you. All right, friends. Related now, we're going to stay with the migrant situation for just a moment here. Thousands more migrants, as you heard, and refugees have continued to make their way to Austria and Germany. The Austrian police estimate that about 4,000 migrants crossed into the country today, and police in Germany say up to 10,000 migrants are expected to reach Munich by the end of today. However, Germany has warned that its willingness to help should not be overstretched. Now, keep that point in mind. Germany, at this moment, as you'll hear in other videos as well, they welcome the idea of Germany looking good to the rest of the world because of that guilt complex it holds since World War II and Hitler. So they're welcoming this at this moment in time to make them look good. Now, the opening caption with this opening photograph here, friends, the caption with this opening photograph reads, "Convoy driver says, I'm not struggling, I'm not smuggling, I'm just helping."
This is part of the convoy that travelled from Vienna earlier today. They just crossed the border and they found a family by the side of the road.
Came here as a convoy, about 170 cars, and now we split it up because the main part went to Gea. There's a refugee camp and we try to help there, and we just split it up because we heard some people are waiting here for.
And can you show me who you found here?
Oh, it's a family, 3 guys with their kids, 3 brothers and his wife and 3 kids. And now we split them up on the cars and went over.
Everything okay?
Are you not worried about the police response?
Oh, well, right now the police is pretty calm in Austria, and they very helpful, actually. I'm more worried about the Hungarian police, but well, right now everything is calm. They also opened the train stations and to let the people come to the border, and from there our Austrian train company picked them up to bring them to Vienna.
You are essentially people smuggling here under Hungarian, under Austrian.
No, I'm not. I don't take money for it. I just don't know that they are refugees, and I bring them over the border because they are tramping, you know? So I'm not smuggling, no. I'm just helping.
My mother going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've come from Syria. You're Kurds from Syria. How did you get to Europe?
Because war in a century, because ISIS, regime Bashar Assad, everything, not leave Syria.
Where are you going?
Germany or Vienna, it's two capital, two century, beautiful.
They will now be driven over to Vienna, courtesy of these Austrian activists.
Okay, thank you very much. Anna Holligan, I believe that was the reporter. Anna, you hit that poor guy with a smuggling accusation or challenge there, but he answered it well. No, I'm not smuggling, I'm not charging him any money, I'm just helping, he said. Good attitude on the part of a lot of people there. The German Interior Ministry, though, has said the decision to allow migrants in over the recent days was an exception, and that the EU's rules requiring asylum seekers to be processed in the first country that they arrived in remains valid. So, you got a little softening of the heart, especially after that Syrian father's dinghy capsized and he tried to save his couple of sons and they were shouting, "Dad, don't die!" He went under as he's trying to hold them up. And he wound up living, and his sons washed ashore dead, and his wife died too, and he buried them. And the last report is that he's staying in Syria near their grave, and he's not going to leave because of having buried his wife and kids there. The caption with this next photograph in this story on the migrant, refugee, and migrant problem reads this way: thousands of migrants passed through Vienna's main railway station at the weekend. And then we've got several photographs in a row here. The caption on this one reads, "They had traveled north through the Balkans, like here in Serbia." They had traveled north through the Balkans, like here in Serbia. Mr. Feynman issued his statement after speaking by phone with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban today, saying, "We have always said this is an emergency situation in which we must act quickly and humanly." The Australian Chancellor said, "We've helped more than 12,000 people in an acute situation. Now we have to move step by step away from emergency measures towards normality." The Germans, the change means that Austria will restore spot checks on those entering the country as it had before the weekend. And then I believe we have a migrant map I can show you, friends, that shows the route to Germany that people were taking. Now, we showed you in the video today a group of cars driven by German and Australian activists who traveled to the Hungarian border to pick up migrants and distribute food. One of the Austrian activists taking part, Angelika Neurith, told the BBC, "I think this is my duty. I cannot close my eyes anymore. Hungarian police said anyone taking people across the border was breaking the law on people smuggling. So that's why Anna Halligan asked the one fellow that question. Although the activists were able to collect migrants without being stopped. Now the caption on this photograph reads, Austria opened its borders, allowing migrants access to Germany. Thousands of people have passed through Austria this weekend, but now the Austrian government says it's time to slowly stop the unimpeded flow of migrants and reintroduce spot checks on people entering the country. Bethany Bell submitted this report from Vienna. The decision to open the borders was always meant as a short-term reaction to what Chancellor Faymann called an emergency situation intended to ease the migrant crisis in Hungary. In the long term, Austria wants European Union countries to share the burden of refugees. The migrant crisis has caused tensions between Austria and Hungary. In an interview on Austrian television, Hungarian Prime Minister Walter Orban called on Austria to close its borders. The crisis took a dramatic turn Friday night when Hungary removed restrictions on transit and helped migrants reach the Austrian border. On Saturday, up to 10,000 people traveled by bus, train, and on foot to Vienna, with many continuing to Munich and other German cities. Now, we do have video with Bethany Bell. Migrants in Vienna and the Vienna train station have been guided onto trains destined for Munich, as Bethany Bell reports.
This platform at Vienna's Westbahnhof railway station has been sealed off because this is where the trains are arriving from Nickelsdorf, bringing migrants from the border to Vienna. And once they're here at Westbahnhof, they can change trains, and many of them then travel on to Munich in Germany. Now, there's a lot of police here, there are a lot of people helping, and also a sign from the city of Vienna telling people that they are safe. They're doing their best to organize assistance, and the people here are welcome.
Refugees, the train towards Munich is now boarding on this platform. There is a lot of empty space towards the end of the train. Again, the train towards Munich is now boarding on this platform.
These people hope that this will be the last stage in their long journey. Many of them say they want to apply for asylum in Germany. There are people here on the platform handing out drinks, handing out food, giving them advice. Many Viennese have spent long hours here at the station trying to help the refugees. But not everybody is convinced. I spoke to one man standing here at the station. He said he's worried about Islamic State, and he thinks that Europe is preparing big problems for itself in the future.
Okay, friends, the migrants traveled north through the Balkans, Greece, Macedonia, and Serbia before arriving at Hungary's southern border. Today saw 114 migrants, Syrians bound for Greece, rescued from a fishing boat off Cyprus. And migrants who arrived in Hungary from neighboring Serbia have been held by authorities in a new processing center, reports James Reynolds.
These migrants and refugees from a number of different countries have made it from Serbia here into Hungary. But they've been stopped by the Hungarian authorities and put on these buses and taken to this new processing centre, I suppose you'd call it. It's just been put up. You can see the fences there and the barbed wire on top. All of these people were brought here in previous buses, and essentially their journeys to Germany and beyond are now on hold while they wait for Hungary to process them. And we've been here for several hours now, and the migrants and refugees have been getting increasingly restless, a little bit confused. They started crowding around that gate for information. There's Hungarian police on the other side. They've let through families with children, small amounts there to process them. But these people can't carry on their journeys until Hungary allows them to leave. And for the moment, no one is telling them when that will be.
Migrants who have arrived in Hungary from neighboring Serbia have been held by authorities in a new processing center. James Reynolds submitted a later report to say Hungary is also pressing ahead with plans to tighten up border controls and could send troops to its southern frontier if Parliament agrees. A border fence is due to be completed by September 15. Now, Germany expects to take in 800,000 people this year. Syrians are the largest group traveling, followed by Afghans and Eritreans, although Germany has reaffirmed that the EU rules on processing asylum requests are still in force. Last month, it waived the rule for people from Syria, allowing them to register in Germany regardless of where they first entered the EU, regardless of where they first entered the EU. Now there's some video here that shows some charity on the part of people. Thousands of migrants have crossed into Austria after Hungary's surprise move to take them by bus to the border. For days, the government had blocked them, as you know, as we've been showing you, from traveling by train, but it relented after many began walking towards the border on Friday. Matthew Price reports from the Austrian town of Nickelsdorf, where locals have been handing out food and drink to people getting off the buses.
There's a real outpouring of charity here just on the Austrian border with Hungary, where people are now arriving from Hungary, and they're going to be heading off on trains to Vienna and then presumably on to Germany. But there's even been applause here when these buses have arrived. Just seems that whatever the politics of the situation, there are an awful lot of people, and I saw this also in Hungary, who are determined to do little things to try and ease the difficulties for those coming over. Doesn't address the big political dilemma, of course, that exists, but it must help, even just a little bit.
And the BBC's chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, filed this report.
Budapest, and a central station changed, almost empty of refugees. These scraps of paper on the platform tell a story, a timetable for train departures. For those with tickets, trains were now running to the Austrian border. More than 8,000 have left Hungary in the past 24 hours. 2 hours later, and close to the border, they were told to change trains for Vienna.
You just have to get stay here. This train doesn't go further.
Excuse me, I just want... where does this train go?
Vienna.
Vienna, that's okay. Thanks.
What's happened is that the Hungarians have bowed to a reality. They simply can't register the number of people who have been coming to the country. So what they're doing here is effectively waving people through to Vienna and Austria. Today there was no need to walk across the border, but this was still another wearying stage on a long journey. Volunteers arrived in Hungary to offer help. among them a group from London.
We supported them by getting them clothes, shoes, because lots of people were giving them food, and what they wanted is good, sustainable wear for the walk.
In the past few days, we have seen countless acts of kindness towards the refugees and migrants, but Europe is divided over what's happening. And here's why. This was a port near Athens today. A ferry arrives with nearly 2,000 refugees and migrants from the Greek island of Lesbos. They too will start a journey across Europe. There are growing signs of rifts in Europe over the decision by some countries to ease travel restrictions for refugees. The government in Hungary has been outspoken, warning that the supply of immigrants was endless. Across Europe, there has been much generosity towards the refugees, but the numbers of new arrivals are causing strains and tensions within the EU. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Hungary.
And friends, I've got a special report next from Stratfor. Europe rethinks the Schengen agreement, and this is republished with permission of Stratfor. Now, the caption with the opening photograph for this story, friends, or report analysis reads: Migrants board a train to Munich at Vienna's Westbahnhof railway station in the early hours of September 1. Now, first of all, here's the Stratfor forecast. Rising immigration and fragile economic recovery in Europe will reduce political support for the Schengen Agreement, which eliminates border crossings controls among member states. The Schengen Agreement will likely be reformed to make room for countries to tighten their border controls more frequently. Friction between Schengen members and other countries will remain. That's a German word, kind of hard for me sometimes to say. Schengen. The friction between Schengen members and other countries will remain, as will tension within the bloc itself. Now, here's an analysis from Stratfor. When France, West Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg signed the Schengen Agreement in 1985, they envisioned a system in which people and goods could move from one country to another without barriers. The vision was largely realized. Since its implementation in 1995, 10 years later after it was signed, the Schengen Agreement eliminated border controls between its signatories and created a common visa policy for 26 countries. The treaties was a key step in the creation of a federal Europe. By eliminating border controls, member states gave up a basic element of national sovereignty. The agreement also required a significant degree of trust among its signatories because it put the responsibility for checking foreigners and foreigners' identities and baggage on the country of first entry into the Schengen area. Once people have entered a Schengen country, they can move freely across most of Europe without facing any additional controls. The Schengen Agreement was implemented in the 1990s when the end of the Cold War and the prospect of permanent economic prosperity led EU members to give up national sovereignty in many sensitive areas. The creation of the Eurozone is probably the most representative agreement of the period. But several things have changed in Europe since then, and member states are beginning to question many of the decisions that were made during the preceding years of optimism. The most important change of the past 6 years is probably Europe's economic crisis and its byproduct of the rise of nationalist political parties. Not far behind that, though, is the substantial increase in the number of asylum seekers in Europe, which is putting countries on the European Union's external borders, such as Greece and Italy, and countries in the continent's economic core, such as France and Germany, under significant stress. This is not the first time the Schengen Agreement has been questioned, but the combination of a rising number of asylum seekers, stronger nationalist parties, and fragile economic recovery are leading governments and political groups across Europe to request the redesign and, in some cases, the abolishment of the Schengen Agreement. Now, the caption with this photograph, friends, reads, once in a while we get one that is in a format that won't come through. Schengen Agreement members and non-members. On the one hand, countries in Northern Europe criticize countries on the Mediterranean for their lack of effective border controls and for their failure to fingerprint many of the asylum seekers. Now, friends, let me check something here. It could be that. Let me just check this and see. Okay, no, that's supposed to be a chart that's not coming through, and so is that. On the one hand, we were saying countries in Northern Europe criticize countries on the Mediterranean for their lack of effective border controls and for their failure to fingerprint many of the asylum seekers that reach EU shores. This means that the migrants can move elsewhere in the continent to apply for asylum in recent months. In recent months, French and Austrian authorities, accused Rome of allowing and even encouraging asylum seekers to leave Italy and threatened to close their borders with Italy. Indeed, France followed through with its threat and briefly closed its border in late June. On the other hand, countries in southern Europe criticized their northern peers for their lack of solidarity. Italy and Greece have repeatedly demanded more resources to patrol the Mediterranean and rescue immigrants, more funds to shelter asylum seekers, and the introduction of immigration quotas in the European Union. Central and Eastern European countries, which think asylum seekers should be distributed on a voluntary basis, rejected the idea of quotas. The migration crisis has also led to greater friction between Schengen members and their non-Schengen neighbors. The recent dispute between France and the United Kingdom, which is not a member of the Schengen zone, over immigrants trying to cross the English Channel at the French port of Calais, was perhaps the most visible example of the growing tension. But the situation also led Hungary to build a fence at its border with Serbia and issue threats to militarize the border. The European Union is dealing with two overlapping problems. The first is its struggle to come up with a new immigration policy. Between September and December, EU members will hold a number of meetings and summits to reform the bloc's immigration rules. Now, when did we say that'll be? Between September and December. So we'll be watching for those meetings and summits to reform the bloc's immigration rules. Germany, a country that that only a few months ago was reluctant to change the Dublin regulations, according to which asylum requests should be processed in the country of a migrant's first entry, is now leading the push for a change. Germany expects to receive, as we mentioned earlier, this report also mentions it, to receive some 800,000 asylum seekers this year. Meanwhile, attacks against immigrant shelters in Germany are spiking. Main asylum routes that chart didn't show up like I hoped it would. Berlin's proposals include the creation of a common list of countries considered safe, which means their nationals, in principle, should not be allowed to request asylum in the European Union. This list would largely include countries in the Western Balkans, such as Albania and Macedonia, which are not experiencing a civil war or any particular serious humanitarian crisis that would justify a request for asylum. Germany's second proposal is the allocation of more funds and staff to centers in Greece and Italy to identify immigrants and process their applications. Finally, Berlin will also push for a proportional distribution of migrants across the European Union. Each of these points is highly contentious. Asylum requests are a case-by-case issue, and it often takes a long time for authorities to determine who is truly seeking asylum and who is an economic migrant. Deportation will also remain problematic since most countries in the Mediterranean Europe lack the financial and human resources to expel illegal immigrants. In addition, Mediterranean countries are likely to simply accept the construction of larger immigration centers within their territory without a clear system to redistribute immigrants across the continent. Several Central and Eastern European nations opposed a recent plan by the European Commission to introduce mandatory quotas of immigrants, and that opposition is not likely to end. The European Union's second problem is what exactly to do with the Schengen Agreement. The treaty makes it possible for illegal immigrants to move freely among member states and raises some security questions. Several member states have expressed concern that some of the thousands of migrants arriving in Europe could be terrorists. Recent episodes, such as the attempted attack on a French train in which the attacker obtained weapons in Belgium before trying to kill people on a train going from the Netherlands to France, illustrates the problems linked to the lack of border controls. Although authorities do not have the resources to place every single potential terrorist under surveillance, the lack of border controls eliminates a layer of potential threat detection. The rise of nationalist parties is also a threat to the Schengen Agreement. In Finland, a nationalist party is already a member of the government coalition, and Eurosceptic and anti-immigration parties are influential in countries such as Denmark, Sweden, and Hungary. In France, most opinion polls show that the Eurosceptic National Front will make it to the second round of the presidential election in 2017. All of these parties believe their national immigration laws should be toughened, and the Schengen Agreement should be revised, if not abolished. The European Union probably will not abandon the Schengen Agreement anytime soon. Despite the criticisms, the treaty has reduced the time and cost of moving goods across Europe because trucks no longer have to wait for hours to cross an international border. It also benefits tourists and people living in border towns because passports and visas are no longer needed. Finally, the agreement allows countries to save money because governments no longer need to patrol their land borders. The Schengen Agreement will probably be reformed before the end of the decade to make it easier for countries to reintroduce border controls. The first step in this direction happened in 2013 when signatory members agreed that border controls could be temporarily reintroduced under extraordinary circumstances such as a serious threat to national security. But the reform is limited in its scope. Border controls can be reintroduced for a maximum of 10 days and only after consultation with the European Commission. And it explicitly says that a spike in immigration should not in itself be considered a threat to internal security. In the coming years, member states will push to be given more power and discretion when it comes to reintroducing border controls. EU countries in Northern Europe will also push for the suspension of or the expulsion of countries along the European Union's external borders that are seen as failing to efficiently control their borders. The report I'm reading actually says to effectively control their borders. New EU members have a hard time entering the Schengen zone, and the resistance from some countries to accept nations like Romania and Bulgaria, which have been in the European Union for almost a decade but are still waiting to join the Schengen area, will become the new normal. Even without a proper reform of the Schengen Agreement, member states will continue to enhance police controls at train and bus stations and at airports. Several countries already employ sporadic police controls on trains and buses, a practice that is likely to grow. Under pressure, conservative forces, many EU countries, mostly in Northern Europe, will also toughen their migration laws to make it harder for immigrants to access welfare benefits. To a certain extent, the weakening of the Schengen Agreement is linked to the weakening of the free movement of people, one of the key liberties of the European Union. The treaty and the principle of free movement are not the same thing. Any EU citizen has the right to transit and remain in any member state regardless of the existence of border controls. But the Schengen Agreement was designed to strengthen the free movement of people and create a continent without borders. The likely reforms to the Schengen Agreement will hurt this basic principle. Once a basic principle is weakened, the door is open for other freedoms to be similarly affected. The main threat to the European Union is that the weakening of the free movement of people could precede the weakening of the free movement of goods, which would end the European Union in its current form. And that's the end of our Stratfor report on Europe Rethinks the Schengen Agreement. Now, friends, I'm rolling up to our next story. We'll have one on a problem for the United States in just a moment. I want to thank you for joining us here on Nightcast. And I've got a story. As long as we're on this migrant thing, I have some drone footage that shows migrants walking to the Austrian border. Drone footage, let's roll it. Let's go ahead and roll it, and I'll tell you about it. Drone footage over one of Hungary's motorways shows, let me read the captions for those of you who are listening by podcast. Thousands decided to walk. They set off on the 100-mile journey from a train station in Budapest on Friday afternoon. But as night fell, Hungary sent buses to pick them up. They were driven to the Austrian border, and we're watching drone footage of the people below walking to the Austrian border. Buses then collected those camped at the train station in Budapest. Hungary says the move was a one-off because of safety fears. But now more migrants are on the move after a fresh wave arrived in Budapest on Saturday. A further 1,000 people set off on foot for the Austrian border. And there's the drone footage on that. Migrants prepared to make the long walk from Budapest to the Austrian border. And as you know, friends, for days the government had blocked them from traveling by train. So, as you saw the drone showing you the video footage, hundreds began walking the 100-mile stretch of road on Friday. Then the Hungarian government decided to give in and do a one-off on them and go pick them up and take them by bus. Now, the United States and Russia disagree sharply on how to tackle Syria's ongoing civil conflict. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has expressed concern to Moscow over reports of Russian military buildup in Syria, the State Department says. U.S. media reports said Russia has sent advisors and hardware to Syria in what Washington fears is an expansion of its support for President Bashar al-Assad. Any such development would escalate the conflict, you'll hear Mr. Kerry say, as he told his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Russia has been a key ally of Syria throughout the 4-year civil war. All right, I guess it's up to me to tell you the rest of this because I thought that was going to be video. It's just a photograph. The New York Times cited U.S. officials as saying Russia has dispatched an advanced military team to Syria, as well as housing units and an air traffic control center to an airfield. The officials quoted admitted they were unsure of Moscow's intentions, but said the deployments could enable Russia to use the air base to facilitate supply of military gear or to launch airstrikes against Mr. Assad's enemies. And the caption with this photograph, part of this story, friends, reads, "A 2011 uprising against President Assad has transformed into a complex civil war." Now, Mr. Kerry made his concerns over the reports known to the Russian foreign minister in a phone call. If such reports were accurate, these actions could further escalate the conflict, lead to greater loss of innocent life, increase refugee flows, and risk confrontation with the anti-ISIL coalition operating in Syria. That's according to the State Department. Using an alternative acronym for Islamic State, IS, they call it ISIL. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday it was, quote, premature to talk about Moscow getting involved in direct fighting. Pretty good way to evade admitting they're doing that, isn't it? Russia and the U.S. disagree sharply on Syria. While Russia has backed the Syrian government and provided it with arms, the U.S. wants to see the removal of President Assad. In the latest fighting on the ground, at least 47 people died in fierce clashes between IS militants and other rebels in the northern town of Maria. At least 6 members of Syria's security forces were shot dead in the southwestern city of Shwida after a prominent cleric in the minority Druze community died in a car bomb blast. So that gets you up to date on that. And there is more news from Russia. There's a crater in Russia which emerged 10 months ago and has tripled in size to become a 120-meter wide sinkhole. Lucas de Jong with this video report.
10 months ago, the picturesque Russian city of Solikamsk had a bit of a hole. Now they've got a much bigger problem, 120 metres of it to be precise. The sinkhole's grown to claim a few unoccupied holiday homes and is reaching towards the nearby forest. This is an area known for its mining. Experts believe the crater was caused after a flood in one of the underground mines eroded the soil from below. Mine surveyors are keeping an eye on the surrounding soil every 10 days, and local media says work is being done to prevent the crater from expanding further.
We will work all around the dangerous zone, monitor the soil movement, and see where we have land subsidence if it takes place.
Just 2 kilometres away in the city, it's business as usual.
As of today, we have a clear understanding that there's no danger to industrial and residential sectors of the city.
The question is, in another 10 months, just how big will this hole be? Lucas de Jong, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, friends. And one last story for tonight. We want to let you know what's going on in the way of elections in other countries. You know, the Bible tells us to pray for those who are in authority, and that behooves us to make sure we know, as Guatemalans headed to the polls to choose a new president, what's happening with regard to that. Guatemalans head to the polls this weekend to elect a new president after the former head of state, Otto Perez Molina, resigned on Thursday. Mr. Perez Molina stepped down amid a massive corruption and fraud investigation. He has denied any wrongdoing. Katie Watson reports from Guatemala City.
He's only a toddler, but already Santiago's learning to take a stand. Combining drawing and demonstrations, politics has come early for these little ones.
Es una esperanza no para mañana ni para las elecciones.
It's a hope not for tomorrow or for the elections. It's a hope for the rest of our lives. We're not going to be the same old passive Guatemala. We're waking up peacefully. We're always going to fight for our country.
And fight they have. Resign now, people have been chanting ever since several high-profile politicians were implicated in a corruption scandal in April, defrauding the country's customs agency of millions of dollars. And the chants seem to have paid off. This week was a rollercoaster ride for Guatemalan politics. President Perez Molina had his immunity stripped in a historic vote in Congress. He was barred from leaving Guatemala and an arrest warrant issued. He spent the night in prison, following in the footsteps of the country's former vice president. It's the power of the people that's had a huge impact here. Young students using Facebook groups like this one have brought people together from across the country.
We're starting to end 30 years of silence. Because of the civil war, we wouldn't dare to speak our minds, and now that's changing. We're starting to say what we think, what we feel, and what we want for our country, and that's a big change for us.
And friends, that big change is something we're probably going to see a lot of impact from in this and many other stories too. Now, I promised you that I can't end with that last story. I promised you I'd tell you about the rally that went on today for jailed clerk Kim Davis in Kentucky. Davis' husband, Joe Davis, told the crowd that his wife would not give in. Hundreds have gathered in support of a county clerk in the U.S. state of Kentucky who was jailed for refusing to issue marriage licenses to gay couples. Kim Davis, an elected official in Rowan County, has said the Supreme Court's recent ruling on the issue conflicts with her Christian beliefs. Some of her deputies began processing the licenses on Friday, providing one to a gay couple previously denied one. However, there is disagreement over whether the licenses are valid. Normally, they require the signature of the elected clerk, in this case, Kim Davis. On Thursday, Davis denied herself the opportunity, as this report puts it, to be released from jail after refusing a judge's request to allow her clerks to issue licenses. U.S. District Judge David Bunning said she could remain in prison for up to a week, the story is saying. Well, that's an interesting change, because the opening day, the day that Miss Davis was put in prison, the judge was quoted as saying that she would stay in jail until she changed her mind about issuing those licenses. Now, that may have been a statement the judge made before he got the rest of her staff to agree to issue licenses. Now, the caption with this photograph that's part of the story reads, "Supporters assembled to listen to several speakers at the rally, including preachers." On Saturday, Davis's husband, Joe, addressed the crowd outside the Carter County Detention Center. "She won't bow, I promise you," Mr. Davis told the crowd, according to the local Courier Journal newspaper. "I'm just an old, dumb country hillbilly, but I know God," he added. One of the other speakers, evangelist preacher Randy Smith, addressed the crowd saying, "Father, we know what your word says, that homosexuality is an abomination. That quote according to NPR. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday rejected the argument that Davis' faith prevented her from carrying out her duty. She can only be removed from her position if the Kentucky legislature impeaches her, because she is an elected official. Various 2016 Republican presidential hopefuls like Mike Huckabee, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, Senator Ted Cruz, and Senator Marco Rubio have supported Ms. Davis' decision. Mr. Huckabee has said he plans to meet Davis and stage his own support rally. Others, who I'm not going to name, have said she must comply with the law. Well, maybe I should name them, just so you know who opposes what she's trying to do in support of her understanding of God's position on marriage being between a man and a woman, God having instituted marriage himself. And he's the one that names the terms of it. And those in this country who try to write laws that supersede the law of God are, well, like several judges have said, they've overreached. Carly Fiorina, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Ohio Governor John Kasich have said, they're the ones who've said, she must comply with the law. Now, friends, there's one more story I should show with. I have some information on that I should show you and tell you about, because as long as we're talking about the United States and some of the things that are going awry with the country, this relates to that. The caption for this photograph reads, "The pillow fight at West Point is an annual tradition dating back at least until 1897. A huge pillow fight, including cadets at a prestigious U.S. military academy. The pillow fight usually marks the end of summer training, and that pillow fight that they usually do every year since 1897, and they usually do it safely. This year, it left at least 30 soldiers injured. At least 24 cadets were reported to have been left unconscious because pillows were stuffed with hard objects. One cadet suffered a broken nose, while others had dislocated shoulders. West Point Academy said the fight was designed to build, quote, esprit de corps. None of the injuries was severe, and all cadets have returned to duty, it said. Details of the injuries sustained in August emerged in the New York Times, which reported that video of the fight posted online shows crowds of yelling cadets, some wearing body armor as well as helmets, surging together in a central quad. And the caption with this photograph, well, that one's not coming through. Well, we'll have another photograph in a moment I'll bring forward. There was a photograph we're missing. It says, West Point is a publicly funded academy where many of the U.S. Army's top leaders are trained. Although pictures of the 20 August brawl have been circulated on social media, West Point did not confirm it took place until recently. The annual nighttime event had been described as a harmless way of blowing off steam at the end of a grueling summer of training. But this year's event seems to have been a little over-exuberant, with pillowcases reported to have been stuffed with hard objects thought to have been helmets. West Point Superintendent Lieutenant General Robert Caslin said in a statement, "While these spirit events do occur, we never condone any activity that results in intentional harm to a teammate. Although the vast majority of the class appears to have maintained the spirit of the event, it is apparent that a few did not." Military police were investigating the incident and would take appropriate action when the inquiry was completed. There are no plans to end the annual pillow fight, which has taken place, as we mentioned earlier, since at least 1897. Thanks for joining me. God willing, and the creek don't rise, friends. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday night, for the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.